Hi. Thank you. Can everybody hear okay? Okay. Yeah, thanks. My name's Carter Snowden. I work in the iCommons group at Harvard. And I'm going to talk about our experience so far in implementing Confluence as an enterprise service. iCommons is a small group. We currently have about 13 people. Lives inside the larger IT group at Harvard, which is around 500 people, I think. iCommons is primarily a development shop, but we have support and outreach people as well. I think we have like maybe 6 developers and 4 people in the support and outreach unit. The main thing that we do in iCommons is support and maintain our homegrown learning management system, which is called iSites. Does everybody know what a learning management system is? Who's sort of not from education? It's essentially a content management system that's sort of tailored for teaching and learning. So our mission is to provide enterprise-level services in support of teaching and learning. But that said, our services in reality are used across the university in research and administrative realms as well. So we really have to think about that as that mission as well. Harvard, like many of our sister institutions, it's more or less a loose conglomeration of many autonomous units. They're sort of held together by a name and a bit of administrative glue. Financially, administratively, culturally, and even in the realm of IT, autonomy amongst the different schools, and I think there are over a dozen schools at Harvard, is sort of the name of the game. So each school can pretty much do what they want. They don't have to use our services. The way it was put by somebody in the early 1800s at Harvard was every tub on its own bottom. So every school should be self-sufficient. And that's sort of changing, but it's still sort of the base assumption. So I'm not sure how our experience matches with people from the corporate world out here, but I hope that maybe we'll pick up something, and I hope that at the end we can have some questions, and I can learn stuff from you as well. Okay. So the agenda is we'll talk about the current state of where we are. Then we'll talk about the context of the project, how we got started. Requirements, both sort of basic requirements and the sort of extra requirements that we had. Integration, we'll talk about how we integrated a little bit and sort of the options we tried and the paths we took. And then, as I said, I hope we can have some questions at the end. So we're about a year into our implementation of Confluence at Harvard. We have about 300 spaces now and about 3,600 users. I should mention users are created only when they first log in, so we know that each of those 3,600 users has logged in at least once. Probably over 100 of the spaces are directly related to teaching and learning, and the others are sort of represent a smattering of universities, diverse range of administrative and research organizations. Some notable administrative users include the Harvard University Libraries, School of Public Health, and of course Harvard University IT. Some notable uses The Harvard libraries have really taken the service and run with it in a big and enthusiastic way. They credit the Harvard Wiki with having been transformative in regard to the way they document procedures and share best practices. This slide shows a really beautifully organized, who would have thought that, space dedicated to library technical services. Other library spaces include one that was created in conjunction with an inter-university collaboration with, again, who would have thought this, the Yale libraries. As I mentioned earlier, Harvard schools each have a great deal of autonomy, including in the realm of IT. So it's gratifying when one of the schools, when the other school, one of the school units' IT departments chooses to use our service. Here's an example. The School of Public Health is using the Harvard Wiki to publish their service catalog. It's hard to find it to show you a class-related site because of student privacy, et cetera. But here's a kind of an innocuous page from a class-related wiki. Thus far, the class-related wikis are pretty much students writing and reflecting, and other students commenting on those writings and reflectings, and also some that have been set up for student group projects. Nothing hugely unusual yet, anyway. So we'll talk about the context of the project. As I mentioned, iSites is the learning management system at Harvard. It's developed, maintained, and it's continuously extended by the iCommons group, which I'm a part of. Some schools, though, notably the business school, do run their own learning management systems. But iSites is really it's got the lion's share of courses across the schools. iSites takes a tool-based approach to the way it works. You basically create tools for iSites sort of the same way you would create a plugin for Confluence. iSites has always had a built-in sort of combination blog, wiki, discussion tool. But in around 2009, there was sort of a consensus, I guess, that that needed to be extended and improved. So then the question, I'm sorry, and the other thing about iSites to remember is that we have a really nice distributed support model. We have our support people in our group who then talk to support people in the schools, who then talk to, say, teaching assistants, who then talk to professors. So it's a nice sort of a way to get stuff out. And in a nice, we can make use of that, and we want to continue to make use of that model. Okay, so some of our requirements. Obviously, security and user privacy. We needed to integrate with our single sign-on system and LDAP. And of course, we need to keep the data secure. We need to respect user privacy and FERPA rules. FERPA, I just have to write this down, Family Educational Records Privacy Act, in case you didn't know. Which, you have to, if somebody wants to sort of be hidden, they can, essentially. And we also need to respect the group. We have a centrally managed group management system as well. Some of those groups are private, so people can't know that those groups exist necessarily. So we have to respect the privacy of those. But we also need to override these things where it's appropriate and necessary. We also needed to integrate with Harvard's XID system, which is a way of external users getting an account so that they can collaborate with Harvard on projects, et cetera. And we needed to have simple, straightforward user provisioning as well, so that at the space level, space administrator can just say, okay, choose this user, and they're done. And we wanted to continue with the distributed support model that we have. So those are sort of the basic requirements, and they're not much different than, I think in a lot of ways, than anybody would have. Extra requirements, though. We needed to integrate with iSites, the learning management system, so that within iSites, a professor can go in and just provision a wiki for their course, just the same way as they would provision any other tool for their course. We also needed, once that course has been provisioned, within the iSite, within the course site, we need to show, the most recent activity in that wiki. We needed, we of course had to run everything by the lawyers, and they required, which makes sense, that we require space administrators to click through an agreement, terms of use agreement, that basically spells out that they're supposed to leave their space, especially if it's course-related space, private, and if they're not going to make it private, they have to explicitly get the permission of every student in the class, et cetera. And as I mentioned before, we needed one-step permissioning of users and groups for Confluence space admins. So I forgot to click my thing. Sure, there's the. This is sort of the provisioning screen in iSites if you want to make a wiki. This is a recent activity view within iSites, and this is our terms of use click through. Okay, so why did we choose Confluence? The iSites tool concept has sort of evolved from building and maintaining sort of one-off tools to work with iSites to try to integrate proven open source and commercial products wherever that makes sense. And then to go from sort of a tight integration to sort of a looser integration, but with a more flexible product. So this project was sort of the first experiment in doing that. So we chose Confluence because it's proven to integrate well with different single sign-on solutions, as the rich permissioning scheme, and the plugin architecture, templating, and source availability are great. Provide a lot of flexibility for us. So then it came to we decided on Confluence and we had to implement it. So the first things we had to do, obviously, I think, are address authentication and authorization issues. So our goal, don't reinvent the wheel, just let Confluence do its thing as much as possible. Don't get too fancy. And don't override any core functionality. and keep our upgrade path clear as well. We did know, no matter what, we have to integrate with single sign-on and tie into LDAP in some way. But we also knew that this had been done before and was pretty well understood, so we weren't too worried about that. We were kind of worried a bit. Oh, here's the single sign-on. We were worried a bit about groups. How do we integrate with groups? Because we don't have groups in LDAP, et cetera, so how we're going to deal with that. But anyway, so LDAP was not going to work for us. But we wanted to try it anyway. The reasons we couldn't use LDAP, in our LDAP there's no usable identifier that applies to everybody in our LDAP. The only unique identifier is one that we can't use. So that doesn't work very well with the Confluence model. And as I said, there are no groups defined in LDAP either. So that's problematic. Just using the LDAP Confluence connection out of the box was not going to work for us. So we thought, well, okay, maybe we can do this through a virtual directory. So we experimented with feeding Confluence through a virtual directory. Seemed at first to be a good idea. We'd let Confluence do its thing. We'd figure out how to map that unusable ID to something else. And we could bring in our groups from our own homegrown groups management system. But it turned out that just was too big of a project for us. And even if we'd gotten very far in it, it's really a project for the directory services people. It's not really a project for us to do at our level. So we sort of gave up on that. And also, the more we thought about it, the more we thought, well, LDAP may not be the best solution anyway, because, what happens when people leave and drop off of LDAP? If they've been working on some research project, now suddenly they're, name unknown instead of, Joe Scientist. That they wouldn't like that. So, solution, to just sort of rethink it and think about what that LDAP connection did and sort of replicate it somehow. So we decided to simplify. So we just decided to create a simple mapping table that took that unusable ID and mapped it with just an innocuous number ID. And then we decided at the iSites end, actually, there was, I should mention that the groups that I'm talking about are unique to have been unique to iSites. It's an internal grouping system developed for iSites. Now, it turned out that as we were doing all this LDAP investigation, somebody else at the same time, and I wish we'd known a little sooner, was working on a REST service to our groups. So when we found that out, then we realized that we're in good shape. We could just go out and get our group information via this REST service. We could find out either what groups a person's a member of or what groups a person can administer. Those are the two kinds of information we'd need in order to add people to groups and to provision groups. So that worked out great. So at the iSites end, the REST group service was created. At the Confluence end, we needed to just write some utilities to consume that REST service, those REST services. And we use the native Confluence user and group stores. So, we're not really doing anything with Confluence itself. We're just sort of replicating things within Confluence. So here's kind of what it looks like. We can talk about this later if we want, but basically, they got the single sign-on, and then we've got our authenticator plugin, which looks at LDAP to see if a person's name or email address has changed. Looks at the mapping table to swap out the user ID, logs the person in. So that's the single sign-on. And then here is where a space administrator would provision a user. What we've done is here you can look a person up by their email address. And people can have multiple accounts associated with one email address, so you may end up with several records for a person, so you'd have to choose the right one. But that's how you find and add people. So sort of one-step process. And then for groups, our service goes out and finds, from the permissions page, goes out and finds your groups that you can administer you're the space administrator here, and a certain number of groups that you can administer in iSites, and gives you a list of them, and you can choose them from here. So a little bit more detail. This pop-up actually substitutes the sort of native Confluence pop-up for group display. It shows all the groups that the current user can administer or see. So we try to keep it simple, so when a user chooses a group or groups from the pop-up, a matching Confluence group will be created if it needs to be, or if it already exists, it'll be added to the space. And also, when it's added to the space, a sort of predefined set of starter permissions is given as well. No users are added at this point, just the group itself. We did special case some groups to make it such that, like the group, everybody can never be a space administrator. So we have some special stuff in there for that. So this basically relies on this plugin we call our utility plugin. Some jQuery and some really minor modifications to the, edit permissions VMs and edit space permissions.vm file. And it's a similar model for what we do with users, except that looks out to LDAP instead of here. Now the integration with iSites piece, provisioning from iSites. This is the tool within iSites that provisions the wiki. It's like any other tool in iSites that provisions some service. So a person chooses to associate a wiki with their course site. They just click this, and it just happens. They have a site. And once that happens, then within iSites, this recent updates starts showing up. And it's customized for the current user. We can, the person in iSites has to be logged in or they wouldn't be here. So we can trust that we can show them the right information. And the terms of use click-through, we installed this such that there's a little check to see if a person is an administrator of the current space. So the first time they go into that space, this thing will pop up and they agree or disagree to the terms. I don't think anybody's ever disagreed, actually. In fact, I'm not even sure if declining works. Of course it does. So this records, we have a separate little table that records this information. And this is something we can reuse as well for other tools. I'm working on a blog service now where we're going to use some of these same tools. So the conclusion is, keeping it simple is best, and sort of don't try to do too much. Let Confluence do its thing. And some of I think that our models worked pretty well. And as soon as I get back, we're going to be upgrading from 3.5.3 to 4.1.9, which is a pretty big deal. And it's going to work okay with minimal fuss and muss. We do have some custom themes that we built that those are really what needed the most twiddling. But I think that's going to be true of any themes. So takeaway is integration strategy, do what you got to, but mostly just step aside and let Confluence do its thing. So, thank you. Yeah, so any questions? Or I'd like to learn as much from you folks as I can, too. Yep. Yep, there's a...
Too fast for me. With the permission scheme that you had to enforce, did the search capability sort of deal with that nicely in terms of what people were able to read and get to and not get to?
We did... I should have mentioned some of the other things we did, though. We had to disable, like, let's say, the user lister plugin because, some of our group, we don't want to be able to expose group names willy-nilly, so it was just easier to just disable that. And we disabled the browse users ability as well. So, yeah.
Hi, question about the integration with the learning management system. So, you can hear me?
Barely.
Well enough. How much of that is automated? You might have covered this, but I think I might have missed it. So if there's a course in the learning management system, does that automatically provision a space in Confluence with the professor as the space administrator? How much of that is automated and how much is...
Yeah, it's all automated. The sorry, we built some REST utilities actually to do some of this stuff, and we used some of the native Confluence API as well. But basically, when you're in the course management system and you choose to provision the space is created. The course admin group, the student group, and I think there's a guests group are all carried over to Confluence as well. And they're automatically given this sort of starter set of permissions, depending on which kind of user they are. And we also do a thing at that point of categorizing spaces. We give each space a category, depending on, it'll be course 2012, School of Public Health, in order to sort of, the idea there is that we want to eventually build up sort of a taxonomy so that we can make it a little bit easier to navigate around and to browse around and to discover things. Because it's, as you can imagine, in a large university, we're going to end up with, thousands of spaces. And so just a huge list of spaces isn't going to be very helpful to anybody. So one thing I'd really like to do, I haven't talked to them yet, but it'd be great to work with the libraries to sort of catalog Harvard as an institution so that we could come up with that sort of taxonomy that we could use. Yeah. So yeah, it's all one click and you're done. Yeah.
All right. I think we got time for maybe one or two more.
You mentioned that iSites
Yes.
had capabilities for wikis, blogs, and also discussion forums.
Yep.
How did you feel the discussion forum gap in
Uh,
the migration?
We haven't filled the discussion forum gap. That's still people. That tool's still there, actually. The old wiki tool, and people can still use the wiki, the blog, or the discussion in the old way if they want to. And I think that most of the use of that tool was sort of in its discussion mode, and I think that that's still used somewhat. But we're actually about to start a whole investigation into the next generation of learning management system. So, integration of things like Confluence and maybe some other discussion thing may be something we think about in the future as well.
I think we have time for just one more question.
Did you have any issues with any plugins or that you had with once you implemented the new authentication mechanism? For instance, like the Office connector, we tried to implement single sign-on and we realized that we couldn't use the Office connector anymore because it uses WebDAV. Did you have any issues like that?
Yeah. In fact, we have most of the Office connector disabled. Some pieces work, so we can leave them up, but essentially it's mostly disabled. Yeah, that is a problem with single sign-on and some of these things that expect that pass usernames and passwords around and stuff. That just isn't going to work. Yeah.